Today was one of those days where I started playing around with more of the bubbles and techniques, and as I went along I discovered what I wanted to do, so I'm kind of fast forwarding to show you first the 3 prints that I really liked, and then at the end I'll show you how it all started or what I did to get myself to wanting to make these 3 prints. So before I got started, I have my magazine off to the side. I've been using this lately to brayer off, and I put some stencils behind my brayer off page. This was a tip from Christy, one of my viewers, and I thought that was a great idea. I just used some numbers for my stencils to put behind my brayer off sheet. So I'm ripping one of my brayer off sheets, and it's a magazine page also, and I'm just making it kind of the shape of sand. And then I'm putting some white paint down on my jelly plate. Now I shook up my bubble water. It's just Dawn dish soap and water, and I'm using my bottom part of my ripped page here. This is going to be like the sand area, and I'm going to be working on the foamy area for where the water will be. I'm just going to take my foam in areas where I think it would wash up against the shore, so I have it a little more heavy. The bubbles are more heavy towards the shoreline and less towards the ocean, I guess. And then I have a fan, just a desktop fan, that I'm just kind of blowing the bubbles out with to try to dry this a little bit faster. And then I just used my blow dryer. Once it was dry, then I went in with my alcohol inks. I'm just using a variety of blue colors, going from darker to lighter. Now, as I was pulling off this magazine page, I almost forgot that you can use a magazine page as a texture, and it totally took the texture of that cool looking lamp in my sand area. So that was a neat surprise. I wasn't even paying attention to that. So there we go. I have a little bit of interest in my sand area. Now I'm going to block off the beach area. My ink is dry on the top part, or mostly dry at least. So I'm just putting my other stencil part back down, and now I'm going to use some brown colors to make the sand. I wanted to give the sand area a little more texture, so I put the darker brown down, and I'm using this sponge, and it gives kind of like a more sand-like texture. At least I think it looks more like sand. Once that all dried, I went in with my metallic tin extra sheen paint, and this is just going to make everything in the background nice and shiny. I'm just using an 8.5 by 11 piece of copy paper. This is 24-pound copy paper. And I'm just going to go to the corner edge of my page. I do let that dry completely before I remove the print. I probably let my print dry about 5 minutes with a fan blowing on it. So this is the nice silver background, and you can see that cool, interesting lamp texture in the sand, and the colors, they're pretty too. So this time I'm going to switch it up a little bit. So on that first one, I put the white down on the whole background, removed the bubbles, and then put the alcohol inks behind it. And this time I'm going to put the alcohol inks down first. I'm shaking up my bubbles. But before I add my bubbles, I want to put the white paint behind the alcohol inks. Alcohol inks are transparent, so you can see behind them. So this is why I wanted to try putting the alcohol inks down first instead of the white paint. And similar to what I did on the other print, I am just taking the bubbles and putting them just anywhere where I think the water might be moving. And I blow dried it again. Then I put another coat of white behind it. Added more bubbles. And I tested to make sure all the little areas were dry. Some of the little spots were still pulling up some paint, so I just went ahead and removed any wet spots. Now this bottom area didn't have any paint on that area, but you can see it left behind a little bit of the white paint that I had picked up from the prior print. Again, interesting design that I wasn't expecting. Putting more brown paint down. And then I let that dry completely, and I'll put some gold in the sand area and the tin in the water area. I'll just use the other half of that same piece of paper to pull this print. Again, I did let that dry, probably about 5 minutes, maybe even longer. And here the color of the sand looks a lot warmer because I put the gold behind it, and then it kind of goes up to the silver into the water. I liked it, but what was missing on this one is the bubbles didn't look as cool as the bubbles on the first one. So I thought those turned out really great, and it was the ones that I had put the paint down, then the bubbles, then the alcohol ink. So I thought I'd try one more thing with the alcohol inks first. And remember on the second one, I had done 2 layers of the white paint. And I think that also might have affected how the bubbles turned out in the end. So I'm putting another coat of the alcohol inks, then the paint. And I'll just brayer that out only on the masked off top area again. Put my bubbles down. Now for this one, so for the first 2, I had done a fan or a blow dryer to get the bubbles to dry kind of faster, but also I was thinking if I dried them faster, they would take on the shape. This is like 10 times sped up, and it's just real-time drying. I didn't use anything. I walked away for like an hour and just let this entire part dry. So you can see it's got this really cool design that was left behind when I didn't use my blower tool or any fan on this one. So I like how the background is looking here. So I wanted to make sure that the silver covers the entire water area. So I'm putting the silver down before I move my mask. And I'm not going to pull the print with this layer just yet because I still need to work on my sand. So once that dried, I removed the little template here, and now I'm going to go back in and do the same thing with the sand. And this paint has little dots that are kind of happening, and I like that because that looks like maybe sand texture. So now that these both top and bottom area have dried, I put the gold behind the sand area and the silver, again a second layer of silver on the water area. And I do let this dry for maybe 10 minutes on this one. I love the colors, how this one turned out. I think the little silver areas in the background look so cool. To me, this one's my favorite. And then if I get in real close, you can really see those little bubble clusters. It just looks really, really pretty. And then even where the sand is, I love the color of it. Looks like maybe the sun is hitting it at sunset or something. Just really pretty. So these are my 3 prints that look like beaches, and the first one had the colors I didn't love as much, but I did like the silver in the water and I liked the bubbles. The second one I liked the sand, and so by the third one I wanted to do better with my gradient colors on the water and my sand, making it look more warm, like warm sand. So this one definitely turned out a lot more like what I was hoping for, and it was really fun. This one took the longest of the 3 prints just because this one I let it air dry for the bubbles, but I do think it was worth it if you're wanting to have a really cool texture, something that is more realistic, I guess, with the bubbles. The one on the right didn't turn out so great on the bubbles, and then the one on the left turned out really cool as well. So if you're interested in continuing watching, these are the first few prints I did during this print session that kind of got me thinking about wanting to do the beach scenes. Those are the ones that I liked that turned out, but this is kind of what got my brain just exploring. So I started with some bubbles on the gel plate and just dropped some alcohol inks onto the bubbles, and at this point I didn't really know where I was going with this technique. I just wanted to see if I could get the bubble look with alcohol inks. But you can see everywhere where I'm dropping the alcohol, the bubbles just kind of disappear, and they're popping, but they're not really leaving behind the design of bubbles. But that's okay. I'm just going to play around here and see what else I can do with this. I'll put some more bubbles on top of the ink that I just put down. All that it's really doing is it's spreading out the color. Like I said, it's not really taking on the bubble shape like how the acrylic paint does. The acrylic paint does really well to make those bubble shapes. So at this point it was very wet because the bubbles have a lot of water in them. So I did use my heat tool to dry those. It does take quite a while to dry even with the heat tool. And I was also very careful to kind of keep my distance. Heat and the jelly plate don't go well, so I made sure to be far away from my gel plate so that I wouldn't ruin it. There were still large areas that were not drying, so I just used a piece of paper and pulled up anything that was still wet. Then once that dried completely, I put my white titanium golden fluid acrylic paint down. I needed a little more paint. And then that page that I had pulled off the extra leftover water, then I put that page back down and just pulled my print with this one. Again, I'm still using the copy paper here that's 24 pound, just regular printer copy paper. This is what I got. So this was bubbles plus alcohol ink. Not too noticeable, especially compared to the acrylics and how well those do, but maybe in some areas you can see the bubbles just a little bit. So for my next print here, I'm putting down just, again, all those different colors of blue. I pulled out a few more blue colors here and just kind of mixed them around the gel plate. Added my bubbles on top. And like I said, this is just helping to move the inks around the gel plate. Didn't really leave the impression behind. So at the very least, it was getting my alcohol inks to fill the background. You know, the nice thing about having a soapy bath of water is I can just wash off my tools. And I blow dried that again to let it dry. Actually, I used my heat tool for this one. I had put some white paint down and just put my page right back over the top of it. And again, this is the other side of that page I pulled earlier. There's more ink on this one and it's got a lot more color than the first one. I also picked out different colors for this one to add to it. So it does look interesting. And the white paint kind of makes the alcohol inks stand out a little bit more. Kind of like how you would get on Yupo paper. When you use alcohol ink just direct on the paper, it tends to absorb into the paper because the substrate is porous, and that means it's going to absorb all of this ink. I'm also putting some blending solution down this time, and I'm using my blower tool and a little bit of alloy. This is Gilded. It's a gold color. It actually makes this cool, I don't know, chunky gold when you blow it out, and it just makes an interesting look to the alcohol inks. I didn't let my inks dry this time, and I'm pulling them off in the areas of my paper that don't have any paint, and you can see it absorbs right through this porous paper. This is similar if you work with alcohol inks, alcohol markers. The ink will blend right through if you're working on something other than a shiny surface. Yupo paper is a shiny, like, plastic that you could work on that won't do this. So here you can see the difference, the alcohol inks with the paint in the back of it, and then the alcohol inks just straight onto the paper. So this time I decided to just put the wet alcohol inks right over the other alcohol inks on the painted side, and I wanted to have some of that gold come through. And I'm also just wanting to fill out this page and just kind of cover it with ink. What was left on the gel plate did dry, so I just put some white paint down. And I'm using that to kind of press in the areas around my paper that still needed some ink. And then I took the rest of it and just put it onto another piece of white paper, copy paper. And that's looking really nice. I'm just gonna keep going. Again, at this point, I was just playing around and kind of doing a comparison of what it looked like with the bubbles, what it looked like with just blowing it out and not using the bubbles, seeing if I could tell the difference. So this was kind of my comparison to the one that had the bubbles on it. All right, so here again, this is just the white paint behind the alcohol inks, and it had the gold on there. I wanted to fill in the gaps around this page now, so I'm just blowing out some more of the ink. I'm dropping in some of my blending solution just to get it to move a little bit. There was a lot of white space in between the two poles, so I put this paint, the ink, down in the middle again, just like I did on that last one. Once it dried, I put more white paint behind it. And I'm just layering here, just going right over what was already on this page. So this was the alcohol ink and acrylic paint compared to the alcohol ink with bubbles, and that is what gave me this next idea, was to try the paint first, the acrylic paint, because I was realizing that the bubbles were not working with just the alcohol ink, and I wanted to see how could I get the bubbles to work with alcohol ink using paint. So this is where I started playing around with the acrylic, put the bubbles down. And I could already tell that this was going to leave the nice texture that I wanted for the bubbles. And then I just used my fan to dry it. And then I went in with this holographic teal, dazzling teal paint. It's just a glittery paint. Has a little bit of a blue tint to it. My idea here was I wanted to have a clear color on the back of this white, but in the past when I put alcohol inks down on acrylic paint, sometimes it moved the acrylic paint or smeared it. So I wanted to capture the bubbles as they were, and so I'm using that kind of clear holographic glitter to pull up my bubbles. Now you will notice that you can't really see the bubbles because it's white on white and there's not a lot of contrast there, so it's really hard to see those bubbles. So I did go over my gel plate and just put my alcohol inks down. And while the inks were still wet, I went ahead and put the piece of paper that had the glitter on it and just put that over my alcohol inks. And the idea here is I wanted to pull up that color on top of the paint. I didn't wait very long. I didn't even walk away. So this is, you can see the little bit of bubbles that have the color on them now, and you can see the glitter coming through. As I was doing this print, I was thinking it was starting to look like water or a beach scene, and that's what gave me the idea to try the beach scenes. So one last print here is I just took some iridescent silver and I just went over what was left on the gel plate. And on the other side of this piece of paper, I went ahead and pulled that print. I let this side dry a lot longer than that first side. And you can see here I pulled up what was left of the alcohol inks and the bubbles, and it has the silver in the background. So these two prints made me want to try doing that beach scene. But here are the 3 prints that started all of my beach scenes. So it was the alcohol ink with bubbles first, then the alcohol ink with acrylic. That's when I looped in the gold. And then the last was the acrylic with the bubbles, and then the alcohol ink, and then also some of the silver. So all of this led me to wanting to try my beach scenes, and I think that those were going to be fun for the summertime coming up. I can see them being in a card. I can use them on the front of a card, or I can use them in a journal or even in a little notebook. So I think that these are going to be great, and I will probably play around with these some more. These are a lot of fun to work with. So I hope you enjoyed watching, and I will see you in the next video. Happy crafting, everyone. Thanks for being here.